The ballroom went silent when a little girl in a pale blue dress broke free from her table, ran across the marble floor, and grabbed the hand of a man carrying a tray of empty glasses. She looked up at him with wide hazel eyes and said one word that froze everyone in place: "Daddy." Daniel Hayes knew more about silence than most men ever should. It followed him like a shadow, seeping into every corner of his life, settling on his shoulders until even breathing felt like an effort. Once, he had been a soldier, a man trained to endure hardship, to stare down fear with steel in his hands and resolve in his chest. But no training had prepared him for the battles that came after the war. The ones fought not on foreign soil, but within the cramped walls of a small apartment, against the weight of bills and the heavier burden of loneliness. When Daniel first returned home, he had carried hope. His wife had been waiting then, a woman he loved with a devotion that had carried him through the darkest nights overseas. For a time, they shared something fragile but real. Yet as weeks bled into months, the life he had imagined began to crumble. Arguments grew sharper, her eyes more distant. One day, she simply walked out, leaving behind only a note and their little boy, Ethan. Daniel never forgot the tremor in Ethan's voice the first night he asked if his mother was coming back. He had swallowed his own heartbreak whole so he could look his son in the eye and say with steady calm, "You've still got me, buddy. Always." And for a while, that promise held him together. Ethan became his reason to keep fighting. He worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, chasing every shift he could, his hands blistered from tools, his back aching from heavy loads, his nights shortened by deliveries across the city. None of it mattered, because each time he returned home and saw Ethan's smile, gap-toothed, mischievous, full of life, the exhaustion faded. Father and son built a small world together, pieced from second-hand furniture and the quiet rituals of bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts. But fate, cruel and relentless, struck again. Ethan fell ill, at first just a fever Daniel thought would pass. Then came doctor visits, test results, nights in sterile hospital rooms where machines hummed louder than his prayers. He begged, bargained, offered every ounce of himself if only his boy might be spared. But no amount of strength, no soldier's courage, could hold back the storm. On a night when rain hammered against the windows and lightning split the sky, Ethan's small hand slipped from Daniel's grasp. Something inside him broke that night. He had survived war, betrayal, and abandonment, but losing Ethan hollowed him out in a way nothing else could. The apartment, once noisy with laughter, became a tomb of memories. The toys left in corners, the drawings taped to the fridge, every detail cut him open anew. Daniel stopped talking to neighbors, stopped answering calls. He worked enough to cover rent and food, nothing more. When his hands weren't busy, grief devoured him whole. And so he filled his days with labor, fixing cars, hauling boxes, sweeping floors, anything to keep moving, to avoid standing still long enough for the emptiness to consume him. Still, grief clung to him like a second skin. Nights stretched long, haunted by the echo of Ethan's voice, by the ache of promises broken not by choice, but by life itself. Daniel told himself he was surviving, but in truth, he was only existing. Each morning felt like another battle he wasn't sure he could win. He had already lost the woman he loved. Then he lost the child who gave his life meaning. And now, as days turned to months, he wondered if there was anything left of Daniel Hayes at all, anything beyond the shadows of what once had been. The letter came folded twice, thin as a blade. Daniel found it wedged under his door when he returned from a night shift, the hallway light buzzing above him. He knew what it was before he opened it. The landlord had been patient longer than most, but patience had rent due dates. Final notice. The page said, clipped and merciless. He stood there for a long minute, eyes tracking the numbers, the late fees, the dates circled like a countdown. The apartment behind him was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator wheeze. He set the letter on the counter and rested his palms beside it, as if he could hold the walls steady by force. He did the math he already knew by heart. What was left in the bank? What might come in from the weekend run if the dispatcher kept him on the route? What he could sell? Tools he needed to work, the last good suit he barely wore. He opened the cabinet and stared at the mugs lined up like sentries. One of them still had a faded rocket ship Ethan had drawn with a marker. He touched the handle and pulled his hand back, as if it were hot. Okay, he said into the room, the word barely more than breath. Okay. Daniel had learned to keep moving. When grief pressed down, he lifted something heavy. When fear tightened his chest, he made a list. He showered, shaved, and sat at the small table with a notebook. Calls he could make. Places hiring day labor. Names of people who owed him favors but had families of their own. He turned the page and stared at the blank lines until the ink bled in place. The truth was simple. He needed a miracle that paid by the hour. The chance arrived as a rumor first, someone mentioning that a major charity event needed extra hands. Then it became a detail in a message thread, a time and a place to show up for open staffing. The Carter Foundation. He knew the name. Everyone did. Wealth? Influence. The kind of event where the glasses cost more than a month of groceries. It felt like another world, one that had never been meant for him. But the listing was plain. Temporary staff, same-day orientation, immediate pay after shift. His first instinct was to pass. He'd spent years being the man who slipped through back entrances and side doors with cargo that wasn't his, invisible by necessity. The idea of stepping into a room like that, bright, polished, the air perfumed with importance, stirred something that wasn't exactly shame but lived beside it. He'd loved a woman once who came from a world like that. He knew what it felt like to be measured and found wanting. He folded the notice and slid it into his pocket anyway. The day before the event, the landlord knocked, a quick courtesy, not a threat. "You see the letter?" the man asked, eyes soft but steady. Daniel nodded. "I'm working on it," he said, and for once it didn't feel like a line he told to survive. "I'll bring something soon." The landlord nodded once. "I know you will." When the door closed, Daniel exhaled. He opened the closet and looked at the suit bag he hadn't unzipped in years. The jacket was still decent, the cuffs were not. He pressed the fabric flat with his palms and checked the seams, needlework from a time he could afford alterations. He set the shoes on the floor and polished away scuffs until the leather reflected a dim shape he barely recognized. That night, he lay awake with the window cracked to the city sounds. He thought about Ethan's small hand wrapped around his finger on the first day of kindergarten, about the way his son had trusted him without question. "You've still got me," he had promised. Promises had weight. He felt it now, in his chest, heavier than fear. Morning came gray and early. He packed a modest lunch out of habit and then put it back. No one carried a lunch into a place like that. He filled a water bottle instead, rolled his shoulders, and practiced the answers he might need. "Yes, sir." "Right away." "Where would you like this?" He had been a soldier. He could follow orders. He had been a father. He could anticipate need. At the door, he paused. The final notice sat beneath a magnet on the fridge, the due date staring at him. "One shift," he said. "Start there." He locked the apartment and took the stairs, counting them as he went, one steady step after another. Outside, the morning air was cool and clean, the kind that hinted at rain but held off. Daniel turned toward the bus stop, hands in his pockets, shoulders squared. He wasn't going as a guest. He wasn't going for spectacle. He was going because this was the next right thing, the one move left on a board that had never been fair. If he could put in the hours, carry the trays, move the tables, settle the bill on a life that kept charging interest on old pain, then maybe he could buy himself a little time. Enough to breathe. Enough to plan the day after this one. He didn't know it yet, but the day ahead would ask more of him than strength and obedience. It would ask him to open a door he'd braced shut for years. And it would begin, as most turns do, with a single, ordinary choice. He showed up. The Carter Foundation Gala shimmered like a jewel box cracked open. The building itself was an ocean of marble and light, its wide steps swept clean, the railings polished to a shine that made Daniel hesitate before touching them. He stood outside for a long breath, the weight of his worn suit pressing on him like armor too thin for the battle ahead. A valet whisked away a sleek black car to his left. A woman in a gown the color of molten gold swept past him, her perfume trailing like a banner. Daniel tugged at his collar, muttered under his breath, "You don't belong here," and forced himself to walk inside anyway. The foyer was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cascaded light across marble floors, scattering rainbows onto men in tailored suits and women who glittered under diamonds and silk. Waiters moved like dancers, balancing trays of champagne flutes that caught the light as if they were spun glass. Conversation hummed, rising and falling like a tide, punctuated by sharp laughter. Daniel felt it instantly, the eyes that slid past him, unseeing, the practiced smiles that never touched him. He had been invisible before, but never in a place so determined to remind him of it. He joined the line of new staff, receiving instructions. The coordinator glanced over him quickly, then frowned at his scuffed shoes, at the frayed edge of his cuffs. "Stay near the side hall," she said crisply. "If you're not sure what to do, keep moving. Never stop moving." He nodded, tucking his hands behind his back to hide the faint tremor in them. He had faced inspections before, commanders checking for slack, supervisors measuring efficiency. This was no different, he told himself, except here the battlefield was linen-draped tables and crystal glassware. Assigned to circulate, Daniel slipped into the current of activity. His eyes caught details others ignored. The glint of a ring weighing down a hand that had never gripped a shovel. The casual tilt of laughter from men who spoke as if the world bent to their will. He passed a mirror near the ballroom doors and stopped. The man staring back at him looked older than he remembered. Lines carved deep around the mouth, hair threaded with gray. He straightened his tie, exhaled, and walked on. Inside the ballroom, the scale was overwhelming. The ceiling soared, frescoes painted in colors that seemed to glow from within. Tables gleamed with silver and glass, every napkin folded into perfect geometry. A string quartet played at the far end, their bows weaving music that floated above the crowd. Daniel carried trays, refilled glasses, moved silently among them, all the while feeling like an intruder in a world built on money and privilege. More than once, his eyes caught on families seated together, fathers leaning down to hear their children, mothers adjusting necklaces around their daughters' throats. The sight stirred something sharp and raw in him. He remembered Ethan's grin when he tried to eat spaghetti with a fork too big for his hands, the boy's delighted shout when he had lifted him onto his shoulders at a county fair. The memory hit like a stone to the chest. Daniel forced himself to breathe, to steady the tray balanced on his hand. He kept moving, one step, then another, repeating the rhythm until it became a kind of shield. But beneath it, the ache pressed harder. Here he was, a man who once had been needed, loved, counted on. Now he was background noise in a hall of music and laughter. No one would remember his face when the night was over. And yet, though he didn't know why, something in him whispered to wait, to endure. He had learned in war that the moment you gave in to despair was often the moment before everything changed. Daniel tightened his grip on the tray, squared his shoulders, and walked deeper into the ballroom, not knowing that before the night ended, one small voice would pierce through all the music and wealth and remind him that he still had something to live for. Daniel was setting a tray of empty glasses onto a side table when he noticed her. A little girl, no taller than his waist, had wandered away from the grand table at the center of the room. She moved with the unsteady confidence of a child who had never been told no in her life. Curious, unafraid, wide-eyed at the chandeliers above her. She wore a pale blue dress that shimmered like the surface of a lake, her dark hair tied back with a ribbon. But it wasn't the dress or the ribbon that caught him. It was her eyes, hazel, flecked with gold, and startlingly familiar. She stood a moment in the middle of the floor, scanning the crowd as if searching for something only she could see. Then her gaze landed on Daniel, and for reasons he couldn't begin to guess, her face lit up. Before he could move, she ran straight to him, weaving between guests and waiters as if she had known him her whole life. Her small hands gripped his larger one, tugging gently but insistently. She looked up at him with those eyes, his eyes, and spoke a single word that made the entire hall freeze. "Daddy." The sound cut through the music, through the hum of voices, even through Daniel's own heartbeat. A string player faltered, bow screeching across a violin. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, one after another, until every gaze in the ballroom was locked on them. Daniel's first reaction was disbelief. Surely she had mistaken him for someone else. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a man standing behind him, someone she must have met. But her grip only tightened. Her voice, small but steady, rose again. "Daddy." His throat went dry. He had heard that word before, once the sweetest sound in his world, when Ethan had called him that from the back seat of a truck or whispered it while drifting to sleep. But that voice had been silenced years ago. This girl couldn't know him. She couldn't. And yet, her eyes, the shape of her chin, even the tilt of her smile. Something deep inside him stirred, something beyond reason. The crowd began to murmur. Shocked whispers spread in ripples. Who is he? What did she say? Did you hear that? At the head table, a man in his 70s rose to his feet, his face thunderous. Daniel recognized him at once from photos and newspapers. Henry Carter, billionaire, host of the Gala. And if the resemblance was any clue, the little girl's grandfather. Daniel opened his mouth, meaning to explain, to apologize for the confusion. But nothing came out. The girl pressed herself against his leg, refusing to let go. He could feel the small tremor of her hand wrapped around his, as if she was afraid someone might pull her away. Henry Carter's voice thundered across the room. Lily. The name cracked like a command. Come back here this instant. The girl, Lily, only shook her head, eyes still fixed on Daniel. No, he's my daddy. The words struck him harder than any blow. He staggered, his body caught between the need to deny and the aching truth he couldn't yet understand. Around them, the wealthy guests leaned forward, hungry for the unfolding scandal. Cameras lifted discreetly, phones angled for shots they could whisper about tomorrow. Daniel bent slightly, trying to reason with her, his voice rough with confusion. Sweetheart, I think you've got the wrong man. But she only clung tighter, the certainty in her face as unshakable as the pounding in his chest. Henry Carter's expression darkened, fury flashing like a storm behind his eyes. And then, from the far side of the crowd, another figure appeared. A woman in an emerald gown, tall, graceful, her face pale, as if she had seen a ghost. She moved slowly at first, then faster, until she stood only feet away from him. Daniel's heart lurched. It had been nearly a decade, but he knew her instantly. Elena Carter, the woman he had once loved so fiercely he would have followed her anywhere. The woman who had vanished without a word, leaving him broken and bewildered. And now here she was, her daughter's hand in his, her eyes wide with a mix of shock, guilt, and something else he couldn't name. The room held its breath. Daniel's world tilted, the edges of memory and reality colliding. He had walked into this place seeking work, but in the span of a single word, everything he thought he knew about his past, his loss, his future, had been ripped wide open. Daniel's chest tightened as Elena drew nearer, her emerald dress whispering against the polished floor. For a heartbeat, it was as though the years between them had collapsed, and he was back in the summer heat of their youth, when she had laughed with her whole body and looked at him like no difference of class or wealth could keep them apart. But now her expression was carved with something heavier, regret, shame, and an urgency that made her steps falter. Elena, Daniel whispered, the name dry and foreign on his tongue after so long. His voice cracked with disbelief. What is this? What's going on? Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Henry Carter's voice sliced through the ballroom. Enough of this nonsense. He strode forward, his presence commanding the room. Lily, come to me. But the girl, Lily, pressed herself tighter against Daniel's leg, eyes wide, trembling yet determined. No, she said, small but resolute. I want my daddy. The crowd murmured louder now, a wave of whispers crashing against the marble walls. Elena closed her eyes, drew a trembling breath, and finally spoke. She's right, father. She's telling the truth. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. Truth, he repeated, his voice raw. He looked from Elena to the little girl, then back again. His throat constricted. Elena, what are you saying? Her eyes shone as tears welled, spilling down her cheeks despite her attempt to hold them back. She's yours, Daniel, she whispered. Lily is your daughter. The words hit him like a blow, staggering him back a step. His gaze darted to Lily. Her eyes, the familiar flecks of hazel, the stubborn set of her chin, and suddenly it wasn't impossible anymore. It was undeniable. His knees weakened, and for a moment he had to grip the edge of a chair to steady himself. You knew? His voice broke into a harsh whisper, grief and anger braided tight. All these years you knew, and you said nothing? Elena flinched, as though each word had been a lash across her skin. I didn't have a choice, she said, desperation rising in her voice. My father. She shot a glance at Henry Carter, whose face had turned to stone. He forbade it. He forbade us. When I found out I was pregnant, he sent me away. Overseas. He told me if I defied him, he'd ruin you. He had the power, Daniel. And I was too afraid. Daniel's jaw clenched so hard it ached. He remembered the abrupt silence years ago, the unanswered letters, the nights he had stood outside her house waiting for a glimpse, until finally he had forced himself to let go of a love he couldn't understand why he had lost. And now here she was, telling him that behind it all had been a father's iron hand and a daughter raised without him. "You should have told me," he said, voice low, trembling with the weight of years stolen. "You should have given me the chance." "I know," Elena said, tears streaking her face. "I know, and I have lived with that regret every day." But she always asked Daniel. She always wanted to know about her real father. And tonight she found you herself. Lily's small hand tugged his sleeve, her voice uncertain but insistent. "You are my daddy, right?" Daniel's vision blurred as he knelt, lowering himself until he was eye level with her. His voice caught in his throat. He wanted to answer, to claim her, but the weight of fury, betrayal, and awe pressed too heavy on his chest. He managed only a nod, his hand trembling as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Around them, the crowd leaned closer, the spectacle no longer entertainment but revelation. Some faces softened, others sharpened with judgment. Henry Carter's glare burned into Daniel, a storm contained only by the presence of so many witnesses. Daniel looked back at Elena, his voice breaking. "You loved me once, and you let him take everything from me." Her answer came like a confession, voice torn between pride and despair. "I still love you. I always did. But I was too weak to fight him then." She reached for Lily, but the child stepped back, her fingers clinging tighter to Daniel's hand. And in that moment, as chandeliers glimmered above them and the world seemed to tilt on its axis, Daniel realized the truth was no longer a secret. It was standing right in front of him, flesh and blood, calling him by the name he thought he had lost forever. Henry Carter closed the distance with a measured stride that made space for him where there was none. Conversations parted, waiters veered aside, and the quartet fell silent mid-phrase. Up close, his presence felt like weather, pressure building before a storm. He didn't look at Daniel first. He looked at Lily, and the command in his voice softened just enough to sound like care. "Come along, darling. You've had your fun." Lily shook her head and pressed closer to Daniel. He could feel her breath against his sleeve, fast and shallow. "No," she whispered, then louder, braver, "no. He's my daddy." Henry's eyes shifted to Daniel with a gaze that assessed and dismissed in the same heartbeat. "Sir," he said, the civility clipped thin, "you frightened my granddaughter. Step back. You are not involved in this family's affairs." Daniel kept his voice level. "I didn't approach her." He swallowed and glanced at Elena, then back to Henry. "She came to me." He heard the steadiness in his tone and surprised himself. In another life, he might have folded under a man like this. Not now. Elena found her voice. "Father, please, stop." The words were respectful, but they carried a tremor of defiance Daniel had never heard from her before. "We can't pretend any longer." Henry did not turn to her. "We will speak privately," he said, still watching Daniel. "This spectacle ends now." To a nearby coordinator, he added, "Bring Lily to her mother." The woman hesitated, then looked at Elena, uncertain. "Don't," Lily said, and the room seemed to pivot on the small, steady sound. She lifted her chin toward Daniel. "I want him." It would have been easier, Daniel realized, to be angry. Easier to raise his voice, to throw back every lost year like a stone. Instead, what rose in him was something quieter and heavier: responsibility. He bent to Lily's height and spoke softly. "I won't go anywhere," he said. "Not unless you want me to." Her fingers tightened. Answer enough. Henry's jaw worked. "You're confusing her," he said to Daniel. "Whatever past acquaintance you had with my daughter is irrelevant. This is a child's mistake. You will release her hand." Daniel straightened. He thought of hospital nights and empty mornings, of the way silence can swallow a person whole. He thought of promises. "She said my name," he replied. "I didn't give it to her." Elena stepped between them, not blocking Henry so much as forcing him to see her. "It isn't a mistake," she said. Tears threatened again, but she kept her voice firm. "I hid the truth because I was afraid. That was my choice. Not hers. Not his." For the first time, Henry's composure thinned. "You were protecting this family," he said. "I protected you both. I did what was necessary." "Necessary for whom?" Elena asked. The question hung in the air like glass. Several guests looked down at their place settings. Others could not look away. Henry exhaled through his nose, reassessing the room. The witnesses, the story already writing itself on 100 cameras. Very well, he said. We will not litigate private history in public. Miss Alvarez, to the coordinator, escort my granddaughter to the green room. I'll join her shortly. Lily's grip trembled. Daniel felt it, and, without thinking, shifted his hand so her smaller one fit more securely in his. He didn't pull. He simply didn't let go. Please, Elena said to her father, the plea simple and human. Let her stand where she feels safe. Something in the directness of that request caught the room differently than argument had. It wasn't defiance for show. It was a mother choosing her child's comfort over her father's control. Henry's gaze flicked to Lily, small, determined, wide-eyed, and then back to Daniel, who held himself with a soldier's stillness, not a challenger's posture. The calculation in Henry's face paused, if only for a breath. He tried a different angle. Mr. Hayes, Daniel said. Mr. Hayes, Henry continued, tone cooling. You are, I assume, an employee here tonight. If you wish to discuss any claims, there are appropriate venues. Lawyers. Tests. Discretion. The last word was deliberate. But this, he indicated the circle of attention, the cameras, the breathless silence. This helps no one. Daniel almost laughed at the irony. For years, discretion had been the blade that cut him out of his own life. He answered carefully, I didn't choose the audience. He glanced at Lily, and she didn't choose the timing. He looked back at Henry. We can choose what happens next. Elena nodded, relief and resolve meeting in her expression. Yes, we can. The quartet, unsure, tried a tentative phrase that went nowhere. The room waited. Henry adjusted his cufflink, a small, precise movement to buy a second of thought. When he spoke again, the command had returned, but the edges had dulled. Then what happens next is simple. You will remove yourself from the floor. Elena, take Lily to the side hall. We will compose ourselves and continue this evening. Lily didn't move. I want him to come, she said, quiet but certain. Please. Every impulse in Daniel urged caution. He was a worker in a borrowed suit, a guest in no sense. But the child's request left no room for cowardice. He looked to Elena. She met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. Daniel addressed Henry. I'll walk with them to the side hall, he said. We can speak there. No triumph in it. Just a boundary spoken aloud. For a long moment, Henry said nothing. Then, with a curt tilt of his head, permission disguised as indifference, he stepped aside. The crowd unwound, voices trickling back, music hesitantly returning. Daniel did not savor the shift. He bent his arm so Lily could hold it if she preferred. She kept his hand instead. As they moved toward the side corridor, Elena at Lily's other side, Daniel felt the room's gaze like heat across his back. He had not won anything. He had not proven anything. All he had done was refuse to vanish. At the doorway, he glanced once over his shoulder. Henry remained where he was, a man accustomed to bending the world, watching something refuse to bend. Their eyes met, not as enemies, not yet, but as two men who understood that what followed would not be settled by chandeliers and applause. It would be settled by truth, by patience, and by how much love could carry when power had finished speaking. Daniel faced forward. The side hall was quieter, the lights softer, the marble giving way to carpet that muffled their steps. Lily's hand was still in his, small and steady. For the first time in years, he let himself believe that steadiness might last. The side hall muffled the noise of the gala, but it could not quiet the storm inside Daniel. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. Lily refused to let go of his hand. Her small fingers curled tight, while Elena stood opposite, her eyes rimmed red but filled with something new. Defiance, maybe, or finally the will to fight. Henry entered a moment later, the door clicking shut behind him. The roar of the ballroom dimmed, leaving only the three adults and the child who had bound them all together. His voice was lower now, but no less sharp. This cannot continue, he said. Daniel Hayes, you've had your moment. I will ensure this situation is resolved properly, away from curious eyes. Daniel met his gaze. Away from curious eyes is how I lost 10 years of my daughter's life. His voice didn't rise, but the weight in it landed like stone. Henry stiffened. You think you can claim her with words alone? Blood may be a fact, But parenthood is built on provision, on stability. What can you offer? An empty apartment and debts? A girl like Lily deserves the world, and I can give it. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't have your money. I never will. But I know what it means to stay when everything falls apart. I know what it means to hold your child's hand in the dark, even when you don't know if the morning will come. That's what I can offer her. And it's more than dollars on a ledger. Elena stepped in, her voice unsteady but growing stronger with each word. Father, I can't hide anymore. Lily deserves the truth. She deserves both of her parents, not just the version of family you approve of. Henry turned on her, eyes flashing. I protected you from ruin. I gave you a life free from want. You gave me a life built on silence, Elena answered, her chin lifting. And I let you silence me. But not anymore. The room went still. Lily, sensing the tension, pressed closer to Daniel. He bent down, murmuring softly, It's all right, sweetheart. I'm here. Her grip tightened, but her breathing eased. What followed was not the end of the fight, but the beginning. The weeks after the gala blurred into a battle fought not with fists, but with lawyers, courtrooms, and endless questions. Henry tried to buy Daniel off, sliding settlement offers across polished tables, as if love could be measured in checks. Daniel refused them all. He didn't want hush money. He wanted his daughter. Elena, at first caught between loyalty and fear, found her courage in Lily's unshakable certainty. Each time Lily asked for Daniel, each time she called him daddy with a voice that brooked no doubt, Elena's resolve hardened. She stood beside him when accusations came, when Henry's influence threatened to drown them in paperwork and threats. And through it all, Daniel discovered something he thought had died with Ethan: hope. He rose each morning with purpose, not just to survive, but to fight for something larger than himself. He endured the glares of Henry's allies, the skepticism of judges, the endless retelling of his own wounds. Every trial was worth it, because at the end of each hearing Lily would run into his arms, clinging as though she knew her faith in him was what kept him standing. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But Daniel had never quit a fight that mattered. And this time, for the first time in years, he wasn't fighting to keep the lights on or to stave off eviction. He was fighting for family, for the right to hold the hand of the little girl who had chosen him in front of the world and named him with a single, unshakable word. The weeks of lawyers, hearings, and whispered judgment slowly gave way to something quieter, sturdier. Not a victory won overnight, but a bond woven thread by thread, as if life itself was stitching together what had been torn apart for years. For Daniel, each morning began with a new rhythm, not dragging himself out of bed to fill empty hours, but rising with purpose, because Lily was waiting. Some days it was a court visit, other days a simple breakfast at a cafe where she dipped toast into his coffee with a grin. However small, those moments became proof that the fight had been worth every bruise pride had taken. Elena, too, changed before his eyes. Gone was the woman bent beneath her father's authority. In her place stood someone still carrying regret, yes, but also a new strength, a willingness to stand beside Daniel in ways she had not dared before. He saw it in the way she stopped deferring when Henry barked orders, in the way she spoke up in court with steady conviction, and most of all, in how she never let Lily forget that truth was nothing to be ashamed of. Henry Carter fought until it became clear that money could not erase a child's voice. Every offer, every threat, every attempt to buy silence faltered against the simple weight of Lily's certainty: he's my daddy. No courtroom could strip those words of their power. And finally, even Henry, proud, immovable Henry, was forced to step back, his empire of wealth unable to rewrite the one fact that mattered most. When the last papers were signed and the last courtroom emptied, Daniel found himself outside once more beneath the marble arches of the Carter Foundation. The place where everything had begun still gleamed with chandeliers and wealth, but now the light fell differently. He wasn't a shadow anymore, slipping between tables unnoticed. He wasn't a man begging for scraps of work. He was a father, hand in hand with his daughter, and beside him walked the woman who had once been torn from him and now chose to walk back. They didn't speak much as they left. Words felt unnecessary. Lily swung their joined hands between them, humming a tune she had picked up from the quartet weeks earlier, her small face radiant in the evening glow. Elena walked close, her emerald eyes softened by relief. her steps sure in a way they hadn't been that first night. Daniel glanced at them both, his throat thick, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to breathe without bracing for pain. The world outside was no less sharp, no less uncertain. There would be hard days ahead, battles of trust to rebuild, wounds that did not heal in a season. But walking down those steps together, Daniel realized that perfection had never been the point. Real love was rough-edged and unpolished. It asked for resilience, for forgiveness, for a willingness to show up again and again. And tonight, that was exactly what they were doing. He tightened his grip on Lily's hand, felt her squeeze back, and looked at Elena beside him. Not everything lost could be restored, but some things, were given back, unexpected and undeniable. As they stepped into the night, leaving chandeliers and whispers behind, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years, hope that lasted longer than a moment. The city stretched ahead, full of noise and shadows, but in his hand was a small warmth that outshone it all. Because sometimes life doesn't return what was taken. Sometimes it offers something new, fragile, and fierce all at once. And sometimes, against all odds, one word, spoken by a child, can change everything.